Hello learners, we are in BLI 223, Organizing and Managing Information. This is one of the courses of BLS online and we had earlier discussions about classification. Today we will be talking about the types of classification. We have seen that classification is important in different activities of our life, so why should we not have classification in a library? And we have also discussed why classification is important, what is the need, purpose and functions of classification in a library. Now we can have different types of classification, and what are these different types of classification we will be discussing today. Later on we will continue with these different types and see how they are different and which of these are followed in a library. There are different ways of telling these different types of classification. The first is the fixed and relative location systems. There are two types of classification. As you see here on the screen also, they are opposite of each other. One is fixed location systems, the other is relative location systems. We are referring to classification systems as systems here. Now what is a fixed location system? Fixed location system means that we have in a library and the location of a book is fixed. Like you can say that earmark different places in the library, that at this place this book will be there. So as you know, we said that we have different laws in library science, and one of the laws is that library is a growing organism. Since the library grows means we add to books all the time, therefore every time a new book comes. So what we can do in a fixed location system, that when a book comes to the library, we think of a place for that book, and when a new book comes, it comes to a next place. So one after the other books are placed in a library. Such a system is called a fixed location system. But then if you have the location different, like when you in a book's fixed location system, you identify a book by the location. Let us say that you write the location number of the book on the book so that you know where it is. The moment the book finds a different place, this location number has to change. Like you say that the book is in the 5th Almirah on the 1st floor, and in the 5th Almirah it is the 6th book. But in case you have to move that books to a different location, that book will have a different location number on it. Therefore, there is a little problem, in fact not little, it is quite problematic to employ fixed location system in a library. But then initially this was followed and this was quite convenient because number of books were less and number of subjects were also less, and people using the libraries were also less. So fixed location could have been followed. But since in a library this doesn't serve the users, therefore this is not suitable for a library, particularly a library where people come and use it. Had it been a storehouse, we could have used a fixed location system because the book would have been placed there only. And particularly a place where no more additions have to take place in the library, in the collection of books, a fixed location system could be used. The opposite system is called a relative location system. That means the location of books is relative, because the books keep on changing, the relationship amongst the books keep on changing, and new books keep on coming in the library. Such a system is useful for such a condition or such an environment, such a situation, position, and therefore such a system is called a relative location system, which is the system followed in libraries. The location of books is relative to the other books, and such a system of classification is permanent in nature. The fixed location system classification is not permanent. As I said that the moment the book changes its location, the number has to change. But in a relative location system it is not so. Once a number is assigned, it is permanent to the book. Another type of classification, another way of seeing what are the different types of classification is by the design methodology. You know, there are two sets of people involved in classification. One is those who design a system of classification. We call it a scheme of classification. Such people are called classificationists. And the other set of people are those who use these systems or schemes of classification. They are called classifiers. Now, these classificationists, they design a classification system, and these systems that are designed are of two types. One of these is called a enumerative system, the other is called a faceted system. When these classification systems or schemes of classification, as we call them, were initially designed, they were enumerative in nature. What do you mean by an enumerative scheme of classification? In an enumerative scheme of classification, all these subjects are enumerated and their numbers or their notation is also enumerated. Now you can yourself think and visualize how difficult this situation is. You know, this universe of knowledge, the universe of subjects is ever changing, is always dynamic. You can very well see that new subjects keep on coming. The subjects that were not there earlier, they have been introduced. So it is always changing. The relationship among subjects also keep changing. At times, definition of a subject also changes. You know that we had classical mechanics, then we had quantum mechanics, relativity. So these are developments in the field of physics, similarly in the other disciplines also. So it is dynamic universe of knowledge. So an enumerative system of classification is like a fixed system. They call it a park and mark system, that you have different marks and you can park there. So it is rigid in nature. On the other hand, there is a system which is called faceted system. It is not enumerative. It is, in a faceted system, subjects are divided into various categories, and each categories are further subdivided into facets and isolates. And the scheme of classification that began as a faceted scheme of classification is an Indian scheme of classification named as colon classification. It is called colon classification because it makes use of a punctuation that is colon, and it was given by an Indian, the father of library science in India, Shyali Ramamita Ranganathan. So such systems of classification, such schemes of classification are called faceted classification. We will discuss about this a little late in the discussion today itself. Another set of classification systems are those in which synthesis is grafted into enumerative systems. So these are a little bit less rigid, and in these systems or schemes of classification, a very apt example is universal decimal classification. To the enumerative set of scheme of classifications, we can give an example of Dewey Decimal Classification, the DDC, initially. Now even DDC is not enumerative, it is not purely enumerative, but the universal decimal classification, which is an example of synthesis grafted on an enumerative system, it was based on DDC, and they did some modification to DDC by grafting synthesis on the enumerative nature of DDC. The advantage of using DDC was that it had a simple notation. It made use of decimal numbers, and the property of decimal numbers is that they can be easily divided, subdivided, and like that you can go on dividing such numbers. They are simple in nature. The expansion in them is infinitesimal. You can keep on expanding them, and therefore this universe of knowledge or universe of subjects, which is also ever expanding, can be represented by these numbers. Therefore universal decimal classification made use of DDC as a base, but brought in synthesis in this by making use of tables, and therefore this belongs to this category of synthesis grafted on enumerative systems. Another type of classification is knowledge classification and library classification. They are also two different types of classification. You know, when you talk of knowledge classification, there is nothing like library there. There is nothing like the representatives of knowledge. There is nothing like different types of documents of knowledge. It is knowledge per se. It is not done by librarians. It is not done by documentalists. It is done by philosophers. You know, knowledge is so difficult to understand, to learn from. It is such a complex subject that you cannot understand the whole of knowledge in totality. Therefore, we study small parts of knowledge, and the philosophers divided the knowledge into different disciplines. As you know that we study, when we begin education, we are introduced to different concepts of knowledge, the very basics of knowledge. But as we move further, we limit ourselves to different aspects of knowledge, the disciplines, and within the disciplines also we specialize in some subjects. So this is how knowledge has been classified. So the philosophers have classified knowledge into the branches, into disciplines, into subjects, into further subjects. That is what is knowledge classification. So in knowledge classification, the philosophers have not been bothered about giving or assigning any notation to the subjects. They have named them. They have named them as the different disciplines, different divisions, like the sciences, social sciences, natural sciences, the arts, humanities. Similarly, within them, history, economics, and like that they have divided. But the library classification is concerned about organizing the representatives of this knowledge, the documents that store this knowledge, and therefore they want to have a system where they are using this system, using this scheme of classification, they are able to organize the set of documents that contain this knowledge, and therefore they have to think in terms of notation. And why they have to think in terms of notation? Because names are many, they are not really indicative of the thought content of these. Therefore, we had to think of some artificial system wherein which was done by library classification. Not only knowledge per se, but also the forms of knowledge were a consideration for library classification, which made provision for the forms of knowledge. Like a knowledge, like if we say physics could be taught in the form of a textbook, in the form of a treatise, in the form of a journal, in the form of a presentation, video presentation, in the form of a conference proceeding. So the different forms of knowledge are a concern for libraries. Therefore, library classification is different from knowledge classification in that. Moving further, web classification, the ontologies, what they do is they are able to use classification in the semantic web. They identify and describe the different concepts on the web, and not only identify, describe, but also describe the relationship, the functions, the relationships among the concepts, and these are not unidimensional, these are multidimensional in nature. They help in retrieving the comprehensive information in a particular area, and this is another way of seeing classification. Similarly, classification has been divided by areas of interest. We have given examples of DDC, Dewey Decimal Classification, Colon classification, or Universal Decimal Classification. These are all general classifications. So by area of application, they are general in nature. When we say general in nature, means they are able to represent the whole universe of knowledge, and therefore they help a library to classify the documents in the library which belong to different parts of this universe of knowledge. Therefore, it is called a general scheme of classification. But there are schemes of classification, there are systems of classification that have been designed for some specific subjects only, or to deal with subjects in detail. Now a question comes to your mind, why should we have special schemes of classification if we have general classification? If there is a system of classification, or if there is a scheme of classification, then that can take care of all different subjects, all different branches of universe of knowledge, why should we have a special scheme of classification? You have very right question in your mind, but then a general classification is not able to cater to very highly specialized branches of some specific subjects. Therefore, you need to have special schemes of classification for such disciplines or subjects or micro subjects, because basically classification is done keeping in view the needs of users, the requirements of users. You cannot think of a discipline being introduced at a level, let us say when you say about mechanics to college students, and when you talk of mechanics and its branches to researchers or a particular higher group of learners, you cannot just think of providing one notation for mechanics. You need to have far and wide notation to the different branches of mechanics. You talk of nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is a whole field. So, you need to provide a specialized system of classification for nanotechnology. Therefore, you need to have special classification to cater to specific subjects in that area. Another type of classification is called users interest classification. I will take up these one by one. Now let us talk of special classification. As we said, it is a classification for a specific branch or subject only, and Ranganathan called it depth classification. Now what is depth classification? He meant to say you classify in depth. Because you are talking of a particular subject, you have to talk of its different branches, sub-branches and sub-sub-branches. Therefore, he called it as depth classification. And from depth classification came the concept of depth schedules, and these depth schedules were designed for some specific highly specialized branches of knowledge which were the requirements of people who were engaged in research in depth in those branches, and these were designed at the institute, the Documentation Research and Training Center that was created by S.R. Ranganathan at Bangalore, and you have a large number of depth schedules that were designed to keep in view the needs of specialized users, and they were implemented in such libraries. So, these are special classification. Now, when you talk of users interest classification, basically users interest is also be taken into view, because all our classification systems are based on knowledge. They are discipline specific classifications, but at times users may have requirements, may have needs that they would require a set of books, different kinds of books to be kept closer together because of their needs and requirements like that. They may not like certain books which have been separated from each other because of their disciplines, because of the way they have been mapped by the scheme of classification that doesn't really help the users. Therefore, they would like a different classification. Like political science and public administration, they are quite closely related to each other. Similarly, language and literature. So, there are so many examples where our users may like such books to be kept closer together, but the scheme of classification does not allow that. Therefore, if a library is serving such users, it is serving such people in some institutions, they would like to follow a localized approach. They would follow an approach which helps the user to really use them in an easier way. That really brings all these books closer to each other rather than separating them as the scheme of classification says. So, such classifications are called users interest classification. As we have said that the examples that we have given and the schemes of classification that are generally followed in libraries, because most of the libraries are such that they cater to a wide variety of knowledge. They are providing the books from different disciplines from the universe of knowledge, therefore they follow general classifications. So, most of the libraries make use of general classifications. As we have mentioned examples earlier, the Dewey Decimal Classification, the Universal Decimal Classification, the Colon Classification. So, most of the libraries follow any of these systems of classification, and these are general classifications. They have different types of editions. And you know why you require different types of editions? Again, because of the users. Like a scheme of classification, if it is followed in a school library, college library, a public library, a university library, a research library, a particular type of edition may not be relevant for all. Like if in a research or advanced library, you would like to provide a classification which is as specific as required. For such a scheme of, for such a library, you may like to use a scheme of classification which provides the fullest details of knowledge, and such an edition is called a full edition. And in a small library, you may like to give broad divisions only, and such an edition is called an abridged edition. And in between these two editions, there is an edition which is called a medium edition. Not all schemes of classification provide all these three types of editions, but there are schemes that provide the full editions and the small editions or abridged editions. But universal decimal classification is one scheme of classification that provided all the three: full, medium and abridged. Even in fact, they provided a pocket edition also. And what is the difference between them? What the full edition provides, the medium edition provides less than that. Let us say if what it is full edition is providing, medium edition is providing 70% of that. Abridged edition is providing 30% of that, or even less than that. So the classificationists, they know what are the different types of needs and requirements of different types of users, and therefore they design different editions. As you would have seen, the reference books also, dictionaries also, you have full editions of dictionaries, you have abridged editions of dictionaries, you have pocket editions of dictionaries. They are all useful. But then at times a particular edition may not satisfy your needs because the coverage is less. You would like to have a bigger edition. Similarly in the schemes of classification. You may also see that you would like to classify books in a library by form of literature. And you would have seen in libraries that there are broken order in the arrangement of books. It's not that all sorts of books are arranged in one order only, following a scheme of classification. Why does a library do that? Because form of literature is also very important. You may not like to have dictionaries merged with textbooks. You would like textbooks to be placed at one place, dictionaries at a different place. Why? Because dictionary has a particular purpose. You are introduced to a term there, you see the definition of a term, you would like dictionaries at a different place, all dictionaries at one place, all dictionaries and discipline at one place, all general dictionaries at one place. Maps you would like at one place, you would not like maps to be mixed up with the other reference books. You would like gazetteers to be at one place. You may like CDs at one place, you may like films at one place, patents at one place. Therefore, you may have a classification by form of literature also. Doesn't mean that a library will follow only by form. A library may follow more than one, but then what is most important for a library is convenience of the user, need of the user, requirement of the user, service in time. They would like that the time of the user is saved, time of the staff is saved. Fourth law of library science, save the time of the user and the staff. Now let us talk of faceted classification. As we said earlier, that the credit of introducing faceted classification goes to S.R. Ranganathan. And what is faceted classification? It is a system of classification, it is a scheme of classification that makes use of facets. Now what are these facets? These facets are basically the different aspects in a subject. And why we need aspects? You know, this universe of knowledge that we are classifying, it is always expanding. This expansion cannot be predicted. You cannot say this way it will expand. It can expand anyway, in any direction, anywhere, at any point. And why does it so happen? Because of our limitation. We have not explored, we have not known. Therefore, expansion may take any place. Now, this enumerative scheme cannot cater to such a universe of knowledge, because in an enumerative scheme, we have anticipated everything. We have thought of that, yes, universe of knowledge is like this. this. But right now we said that it will change. It is dynamic, it is not static. So if you predict it today, it is like that, tomorrow it may change. Therefore, enumerative scheme of classification may fail, may not really be able to do justice with mapping the universe of knowledge because it is dynamic. Therefore, we need a faceted scheme of classification. In fact, the credit goes to Ranganathan, and a little story behind it. When Ranganathan joined the profession of library science, as you all know that he was a professor of mathematics, he was teaching mathematics, and when he was assigned the job of University Librarian of Madras University, he went on a study tour to the United Kingdom and he studied different libraries and he came to know of enumerative schemes of classification. He was not comfortable seeing the schemes of classification because of this very fact that the universe of knowledge is ever expanding and an enumerative scheme cannot do justice with these systems. Therefore, he was thinking all over that, and during that time he visited a departmental store and he came across this toy, the Meccano set. In the Meccano set he saw different shapes and nuts and bolts provided for children. It is also call it as an engineering set, and this gave him the idea of a faceted scheme. In this Meccano set, children can draw different designs and shapes by using these different shapes, joining them together and creating a new shape out of it, and this gave him an idea of a faceted scheme. And these shapes and the different shapes that were there, he devised them as fundamental categories. He says the knowledge can be divided, can be depicted, can be represented as different fundamental categories. And these fundamental categories, he said there are 5 fundamental categories into which this universe of knowledge can be divided. Any aspect of this universe of knowledge, Ranganathan said, can be categorized into 5 and only 5 fundamental categories. This was a postulate that he gave. We will discuss about postulates later. And he named these fundamental categories as personality, matter, energy, space and time. And he denoted these as personality by P, matter by M, energy by E, space by T, S and time by T. And he defined these 5 fundamental categories as, he says, personality is the main focus of study of a subject, and matter he divided into matter as material, method and property. Energy, he says, is something, is manifestation of action of some kind. And space is geographical space as we understand, and time is the concept of time. Therefore, Ranganathan is given the credit of introducing a faceted scheme of classification, wherein he says that this whole universe of knowledge comprises of different facets and their subdivisions, and these facets, he said, are he put them as fundamental categories. These fundamental categories have further sub-facets, and these, he said, are isolates, and these isolates are of different kinds. So we will be discussing these things in detail, but today what we have learnt is, we have tried to discuss different ways in which classification can be done. Therefore, we call them as different types of classification, and a library may make use of any of these types of classification, but generally libraries use general schemes of classification, which is one of the ways that is by design. There are different ways in which we can see different types of classification. You may visit different types of libraries and see what type of classification they are using, and thus you will be able to reinforce your learning that we have gained from the discussion today. Thank you.